executive
How was your
session.
trip back?
Where's the best place
How was your trip back to town?
It was really good.
Okay, if you'd like to talk, we can see if the microphone picks it up.
Okay, testing. Can you hear me?
6:41.
The one meeting
Just that volume a little bit.
you guys walk up that.
Going
and
up
again,
the mountain, they're doing all this road construction.
Try it now.
But it looks like they're patching.
Testing. Can you hear me?
It's really low.
Yes, that came out through the sound system.
It's out there
I got
for
delayed by like, I think I
Okay.
lost almost like a half an hour.
Okay, and perhaps this would even be better.
Now, was that the truck route?
What's your summer schedule?
No,
I
no,
guess-
this is the first, this is Mount
Talking back and forth with them.
Call the meeting to order. Roll call.
Mr. Jim Bard. Mr. Dwayne Burt.
Here.
Mr. Levi Kressler.
Here.
Mrs. Steph Epperly. Here. Dr. Nathan Goetz.
Here.
Mr. Don Hilbinger.
Here.
Mr. Fred Scott.
Here.
Mr. Charlie Suiters.
Here.
Mr. Mark Butterball.
Okay. I have a approval of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Dwayne Burt.
Here.
Oh, this is for agenda approval.
Yes.
Mr. Levi Kressler.
Yes.
Ms. Steph Epperly.
Yes.
Dr. Nathan Goetz.
Yes.
Mr. Don Hilbinger.
Yes.
Mr. Fred Scott.
Yes.
Mr. Charlie Suiters.
Yes.
Motion passed.
It looks like we have no citizens for comments. I'll turn it over to you, Al.
Thank you, Mr. Suiters. I would just make a quick remark. Even though no one from the borough is here tonight, we did invite them to come and share a little bit about their support for the district and so on. And I would just say, on behalf of the board and behalf of everyone associated with Shippensburg School District, we appreciate all their support. In the near future, I have a meeting set up with our new chief of police. I would like to invite Chief Scott, as well as Dave Lindemuth and myself, and we will be having a brainstorming session regarding our relationship with the borough police and ideas and thoughts on increasing safety and security across the district, across our buildings and so on. So I look forward to that, and I look forward to picking your brain, Chief Scott. You do have a letter that was attached that came along with the information that Christy sent you from the borough. So if you haven't had a chance to read that, I'd appreciate if you do that down the road. Then with that, our major focus tonight will be to share recent relative information to our revenue and expenses. On the expense side, we have especially addressed the large staffing issues, the long list of staffing issues. We know that we need additional staff. Our challenge, I believe, for us as the leadership team was to closely scrutinize that list and bring to you what would be essential priority one types of items that we would need for the 22-23 school year. And I believe it was our responsibility to bring to you staffing requests that can be sustained and supported financially long-term. And then finally, we'd like to share a little bit regarding future projections and our thoughts, for down the road a little bit. I really do want to have a shout out and a big thank you to Christy, to Sherry, and to Joanne. Joanne is filling in briefly here at the beginning. Christy is on her way back from Big Spring from the promotion program of her daughter, and we didn't want her to miss that. But I will tell you, Joanne is not option 2. She's just like option 1. She's terrific. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Joanne.
Good evening. I just want to go over the agenda and what we're going to be discussing tonight. We're going to go over an update on major revenue sources as they are for the 21-22 school year. We're going to provide updated revenues for the local and the state. Provide updated expenditures, which include personnel requests, special education budget updates, alternative education high school, updated final budget summary, the fund balance, future budgeting projections, and we have a section on other miscellaneous remarks. I'm on slide 2.
And we just wanted to share also, from time to time, Sherry, myself, Christy, and Joanne will be chiming in a little bit. You do have a color-coded hard copy at your table. Also, behind us here on the bigger screen, which I think is going to be easier for me to read, it's on the projection device behind us as well.
I'm on the second slide. One more. Okay, this slide shows major revenue sources for real estate in the 21-22 school year. You can see that we have an annual budget of $23,675,148. Right now, when you look at July 1st of 21 through the end of May, we're 6.7% above what we were projecting. We have received $24,093,012.50. When compared to the budget number, we are approximately $415,000 over what we budgeted. As a result, this was a result of a strong collection rate. The collection rates for 21-22 was put in the budget less than what was in 2021 because we had concerns with COVID that we weren't sure what we were going to collect level, so it was dropped down a little bit. And just a reminder that if other budget numbers hold equal, this overage would flow into the fund balance. Is there any questions on the first slide?
When you say flow into the fund balance, how much is going to flow into the fund balance?
Well, it depends on how all the expenses come in too, because we already know that a couple items were under budgeted for the 21-22 school year. So some of these overages will be needed to balance those items. It's really early to project exactly what we'd put in, but we are sitting pretty well with already being $415,000 over what we were projecting, and we still have some more, that might flow in from interim. We aren't getting a lot more real estate taxes, but we are getting some interim money that could come in between now and the end of the fiscal year. Well, there's a slide further back that kind of puts all the first couple slides as a total. So do you mind, we'll wait till there and then we'll go over all of that. The next slide covers realty transfer tax information. We had budgeted in the current year $450,000. If you can see from July 21 to May, the end of this May, we're 208% above what we budgeted. That's about 1.5 million more. That was a result of 2 of the warehouses in the district reselling and an increase in volume of sales of both commercial and residential properties. We have 1 more month also to collect on this. That's a little harder to estimate, but I can tell you in June of 2021, we had $157,000 that we collected, and in June of 2020, $70,000. So we're projecting somewhere between those numbers to finish out the year. Pretty much everything that's for sale has been selling. And same with the real estate tax. If we end, anything over would flow into fund balance if it's not needed for expenses that exceeded the budgeted amount. The next slide is earned income tax. The current budget has $5.2 million in it. We're currently, between July and the end of May, received $5,341,831.45, which is 7.8% above what we have budgeted. That's currently about $140,000 more, and we still have 1 more month to record on that. We are expecting the EIT for June to come in between $341,000 and $641,000. Or with June's number, we expect to finish with that much over budget. And this money also, if it's not needed for under budgeted expenses, would flow into the fund balance. The numbers that are off to the side, that show the amounts received from June 18 through June 21, show you how EIT has varied in June over the last couple months. So that's a little harder number to guess what we might receive in June, but we're going to guess between 341 and 641,000. Any questions? Okay, the next slide kind of takes the first 4 slides and puts it into some perspective with these good revenue increases, but reminding some items that were under budgeted. Major revenues are coming in strong despite the pandemic, but keep in mind these areas down below that are under budgeted, and from special education down to personnel, they are truly guesstimates. We used a variety of data to come up with the estimates to finish out the year, but Christy wanted to be sure that you knew that they were just the best guess. They're harder to estimate what will come in between now and the end of the year. So the first line shows that 417,865 over budget that we've received for real estate revenue. The next shows the 1.5 million we're above budget for realty transfer tax revenue. And EIT, we're expecting to be between 341 and 641,000 above what was budgeted. Debt service, because of level amounts in the budget to hold that, we have 2.3 million. And then you get to the expenses. Cyber charter school numbers were still really high this year, so it is under budgeted by $1.3 million. Substitute teacher costs, we budgeted $430,000. We think that $838,000 number is very close to the ending number. With school being over, we were able to get really accurate information for that. So we're going to finish in the hole for that expense line of over $408,000.
Excuse me, is that because we increased the salary, couldn't increase the wages for substitutes?
And this year, we have 10 building substitutes, which means they're in every day. So I don't believe that we had 10 building subs for a full year before this year. So yes, the increased rate and the increased number of building subs. I'll turn this over to Christy now.
Thanks, Joanne.
Yeah. Christy was special education.
All right, so the next several costs you see on the slide, they're kind of more guesstimates, but to try to give you an idea of possibly where we might end the year, these are just projections. So as you can see, we budgeted approximately $1.8 million for our special education expenditures. Currently, to date, we have expended about $1,960,000 in special ed costs. So we are already over budget. So then to come up with the anticipated expense of about $2.3 million, what I did is I took a look and I said, how much did we pay out in June last year? How much did we pay out in July? And how much did we pay out in August? Until we ended up closing out the fiscal year. So that's how we came up with a projection. I added the $1.9 million that we currently expended, and then again looked at last year's and added those. That is a complete guesstimate, but I mean, there is a methodology behind that of how we came to that number. So, we may be right on, it could be off, so don't hold that at 2.3, but what I can rest assured and say, we definitely are currently over budgeted amount. We did the same thing for the next several lines. So the technology, we have the budget at $349,000. Currently, we have spent $465,000. adding in what we spent last year in June, July, and August, that brings an anticipated expense to $529,413, or $180,000 over budget approximately. And then for transportation, we budgeted $2.4 million. Where we currently have expended $2,401,785. Again, adding in what we spent last year in June, July, and August, that would put projections at about just shy of $3 million for transportation, or about $551,000 over budget. Utilities, we budgeted $730,000. To date, we have spent $726,667. Add to that, again, what we spent, or what we paid out last year in June, July, and August. That would bring an anticipated expense of $796,208, or approximately $66,000 over budget. And then when you look at personnel, we budgeted a little over $38.4 million in personnel. When you anticipate where we may end up at the end of the year, we're thinking just a little over $37,000. So we would be good to the budget by about $1.3 million. And this having to do with just short staffing and not being able to staff all the positions that we have open. So where does that bring us potentially for year-end estimates? Potentially we could end with a surplus. What we're calculating right now is anywhere between 2.8 and 3.1 million. Again, this is just an estimate. Please don't hold us to these numbers. It was just trying to come up with something so the board could kind of see where we think we're going to end the year, as we were fortunate to have some strong revenues coming in. But again, this is not an all-inclusive list. I have not looked at every area in the budget. I have not looked at every revenue. So again, please do not hold us to that estimate, but I think we are going to end the year very strong, and we'll be able to add to the fund balance instead of take from the fund balance, which we had projected through the budget process. Is there any questions on this slide? If not, we'll move on to the next slide. So giving you an update on local revenues. As for the casino, I don't have any real additional information since last presenting this. We are still waiting on some legal guidance regarding this, but the hope is that we will be able to add this reoccurring revenue at some point in future budgets. Again, we don't know what the dollar value will be. When I presented this at a previous budget and finance meeting, we did find another district that has a casino in their premise or their boundaries, and it seems to be a similar sized casino, and they budget a little over $16,000 a year in reoccurring revenues. Again, nothing additional to share there, but as we have additional information, we will be sure to share it. But I don't know that we'll be able to put any reoccurring revenue in for the 22-23 budget for the casino. And then we've also been keeping an eye on our assessed values. So I got updated reports from the county at the end of May, beginning of June. So you can see in the proposed final budget, we had assessed values in Cumberland County at just a little over 1.4 million, billion, 1.4 billion. And then for Franklin County, assessed values a little over 106 million. So when you look at where we're at for the final budget, we were able to increase that for Cumberland County to $1,417,904,400, and for Franklin County, $107,442,490. So what does that mean? That means we were able to add an additional $9,180 to our current real estate revenue line item. And then at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting, I had given an update on the board that we are going to get a significant increase in the homestead farmstead property allocations from the state. This doesn't add any more technically to the district's budget, because what it does is it's just a tax credit for our taxpayers, but it will help our taxpayers in the district. So for 21-22, our allocation was just over $922,000. There was 994 properties that had applied for the homestead farmstead property exclusion. And so the allowance calculated to $154.92. So again, if the taxpayer was in this program, their bill would be last year that we're finishing, their tax bill was actually reduced by that amount. So what does that mean for 22-23? That additional money means to our taxpayers that the exclusion allowance amount is going to go up to $195.20 for 22-23. And we have a few more properties that have applied for this exclusion, so we have a total of 6,040 properties that will get the homestead farmstead exclusion.
Excuse me a minute. This assessed value updates, Cumberland County and Franklin County. Is that how much money we're gonna get from taxes for that county?
No, that's not the amount we're going to get, that's just the assessed value numbers. Like what a house assesses at, and take them all and combine them together, and that's the total assessed value. The dollar amount that we're going to get from that increase, we were able to build additional $9,180 into the budget with the assessed value increase. So what you do is you take your total assessed value times your millage rate to come up with the total additional revenue.
So people, the school districts in Franklin County, I'm trying to figure, I know we got the split county, Cumberland County is the high number, Franklin County is the low. How do they survive?
I'm sorry.
I mean, like Greencastle, Waynesboro, those schools, James Buchanan, they're getting less, their assessed value, right? I'm just trying to figure out, do they make enough money in that Franklin County for those schools to make? What I'm trying to say, it just seems.
They pay a higher percentage of their assessed value. It's just that the counties assess their properties differently, and so in some counties, because the assessed values are so low, or the assessment was done so long ago, that they end up paying a higher percentage of the assessed value. It's not that it's 1% across the board for all different assessments.
So I don't know if this is what you're asking, Mr. Scott, but in the end, when you sit in multi-counties, what that equalization is doing is it's taking, because the assessed value in Franklin County is so low and hasn't been reassessed since the 70s, their millage rate is substantially higher than Cumberland County. But in the end, what that equalization is supposed to be doing is, if you took the house in Cumberland County and put it like same house in Franklin County, obviously it's going to assess lower, but you're gonna pay that same dollar value. It's gonna come down to the same dollar value. So like Dr. Goetz was trying to say, in Cumberland County, the millage rate is only like 12.1 or 12.6, where in Franklin County, the millage rate is 97 point something. So it's a higher millage rate because it's a lower assessed value. But in the end, this equalization is supposed to be making the dollar value the same, whether your house is in Cumberland or Franklin. That's what that equalization is supposed to do.
She keeps saying supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, that's not my calculation, that's the state's calculation.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other questions on the local revenues? Okay, so what does the homestead farmstead mean in terms of the implication to taxpayers? So I'm just going to focus on the median assessed value column, the column in yellow. So for Cumberland County, the median assessed value of a home is $172,250. So what does that mean? If we increase taxes to the index, which is what we have in the current budget, the annual cost to a Cumberland County homeowner, again, with a median assessed value of $172,250, they would see an increase in their taxes of approximately $93 for the entire year, or $7.80 per month. Although they don't pay it on a per month basis, but you can see how much spread it out over a year, what it would cost. But if they have their house in the homestead farmstead program, when you take into account like the additional $40-some that they will now get through that program, their annual increase on their tax bill will only be approximately $53 for the entire year. So what does that look like for Franklin County? Franklin County, their median assessed value of their home is $19,630. So increasing taxes to the index, their annual cost to them for the year would be $17.15, or spread out monthly would be $1.43. But when you take into account if their home is part of the Homestead Farmstead program and take off that approximately additional $40 that they're getting in that program, they're actually going to see their tax bill decrease by about $23 for the entire year. Is there any questions on this slide? Moving on, in terms of state revenues, this came directly from Hannah Barrick, who is the executive director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials. They provide us a lot of guidance and a lot of information of what's happening in the legislature and different changes throughout the year that impact school business officials. So what are they saying? Where do they think the legislature's going to end up? So obviously, we're not going to get what the governor proposed back in February. He proposed putting $1.25 billion into the basic education funding formula. However, PASBO does believe that we will see an increase in the basic education funding formula, and they're thinking anywhere from $300 to $500 million statewide that the legislatures might run through the basic education funding formula. As for the special education funding formula, the governor, again, had proposed a substantial amount in that, but again, PASBO doesn't believe we'll get what the governor proposed, and they're thinking anywhere between 50 and 150 million of new money may be ran through the special education funding formula. And then as for level up, the governor had proposed running 300 million through that formula, but it's more likely we may see 100 million run through the level up funding formula. So what does that mean for Shippensburg? Moving on to the next slide. The three scenarios are shown here. On the left-hand side, you have the minimum of PASBO's guidance, where they said 300 million for basic ed, 100 million for the level up supplement, and 50 million for special education funding formula. So to the district, basic ed and level up would give us about 913,000 of new state revenue. Add to that the special education, and that would be about 102,000 for a little over 1,015,000 in additional state revenue. So where do we go with this information? Well, I had a sigh of relief because at previous budget and finance meetings, the board had recommended in the proposed final budget that we include 1 million of new state revenue, because I had shared with the board historically PSBA has said that we usually get a third of what the governor proposes. So I was a little nervous that 1 million was maybe a little too much, but according to PASBO's minimum guidance, I feel confident leaving the 1 million in the final proposed budget, so that million has been left in there. But what if we would get the PASBO's maximum guidance recommendations? That is on the right-hand side, and you can see the basic ed and level up supplement would give us just over 1.2 million. Add to that the special education funding of 267,000, and now we're up above 1.5 million in new state revenue. So I did want to share this with the board. At this point, Dr. Moyer and I talked. We're comfortable putting in the minimum. We think that we still might get more than that from the state. I had participated in an admin team meeting this morning, and at the same time, there was a PASBO webinar giving us an update of what's going on at the state. So Mrs. Nagley had listened to that for me, and she brought back some good news. Although we don't know what the legislature's doing at this point, PASBO is pretty confident that they're going to run more the higher end numbers through these formulas for basic ed and special ed. So the maximum numbers that you see there, we could potentially, according to PASBO, be getting even more than that. Definitely not what the governor's going to give us, but they're leaning towards it's going to be at the maximum end or a little bit more. They believe, though, for the level up supplement, that might be a little bit more in question, but the basic ed and the special ed funding they think is going to be at their maximum end, or again, like I said, a little bit more. Is there any questions on our state revenues? if not, that brings us to our personnel staffing request list. So in your packet, we provided you for easy comparison what the original personnel staffing list looked like. So what Dr. Moyer and I and Mrs. Woodall and Mrs. Zima had sat down and we talked about this list and came back with a reprioritized list of what we feel should be placed in the budget based on what we're kind of hearing from the state level of additional state revenue that we're getting. So we are continuing to support building in the budget an elementary special education or applied behavior analysis teacher position. That would cost the district a little over $93,000. And then also to support that classroom, we would need 2 part-time classroom assistants at approximately $34,600. Also, we would like to add an elementary special education autistic teacher. You will see over in the estimated cost column, there is no amount in there. And the reason for that is in subsequent slides, you're going to see where we were able to make additional changes to the budget, where we have savings, and those savings are actually going to pay for these positions where you see that there's no estimated cost listed. So it's a neutral cost to the district. But in parentheses, I did put what that cost was so you could see what that would be. That moves us down to a registered behavior technician. Originally, we were asking for 2. We are thinking that hopefully we could get away with 1 at this point, and that would support the special education applied behavior classrooms. And I will look at Mrs. Woodall. Does that behavior technician, would that support any other classrooms beside the ABA classrooms?
Oh, yes. Can you guys hear me? I don't know if my mic is charged. Can you hear me through the mic? No. I'll speak very loudly. So with the registered behavior technician, they're going to also be able to support the general education classrooms. So last year we received 2 BCBAs through the budgeting process. Those are, I don't remember what BCBAs.
Board Certified Behavior Analysis.
Thank you. So what those BCBAs do is they go into the classroom and they observe students who are exhibiting behavior problems, both special education and general education. And they write up behavior plans for the teachers to follow. But they aren't able to model those behaviors because they're going off to analyze other students. So what the registered behavior technician does is they model the behavior plans for the teachers to be able to carry out those behavior plans. As a classroom teacher, I did not have a registered behavior technician in my classroom or in my district. That was a long time ago before I think those positions even existed. But I do know it would have been beneficial for me as a teacher to have that, because I would get a behavior plan on a student, and I taught 8th grade, and it would be like reward the student with stickers. Like, I don't really know what 8th grader really wants stickers, but I didn't really know how to carry out those behavior plans. So I wasn't doing it with fidelity, therefore the behavior plans were not as effective as what they should have been. And that's where this position would come in to be able to help model for the teachers how to execute the behavior plans with fidelity to ensure the behavior plans are effective in changing student behavior.
Okay, so then that brings us on to our next item on the list. We had previously spoken to you about an English as a second language, bringing that position back in-house. Again, if this item does not make the list, this expense we cannot cut from the budget because we would have to put it back in the contracted side of the budget. But if we bring this position in-house, we think that we could save a small amount of money. If we continue to contract with the IU for an ESL teacher, it's about $124,000. If we hire our own teacher, it's about $110,000. But this is not our only ESL teacher. I'm going to look to Mrs. Woodall. We have how many other contracted positions through the IU as well?
So I currently have 1 contracted position through, if we would approve this one. I have 2 full-time contracted positions through the IU. I would like to move one of those to in-house and then have 1.5 positions contracted through the IU. The benefit of contracting through the IU with any of our positions is then we have access to all of their resources and professional development for all of our ESL teachers. So that does still have, it has a benefit of being in-house for some of ours, but it also has a benefit of contracting out because those resources, if I had to buy them on an annual basis, would cost me more than contracting out.
So we are also, moving down to number 6, we are also asking for alternative high school education teacher. And you can see, again, there's no estimated cost listed in the cost column, and that's because we are able to fund that through additional savings we found in the budget. Again, that will be reviewed on a later slide. We are also recommending an assistant superintendent. And then number 8, we can't actually speak about this in public yet, but we do have an item, an executive session item, where we would be, it's right now cost neutral, because again, we're funding that expense through savings that we found throughout the budget since the last meeting, but that would be $25,502. Line item 9, we're asking for 2 per building for Nancy Grayson and James Bird, 2 per building noontime aides. Again, the majority of this, the $26,744, the majority of that will be funded through savings that we found in the budget. The small amount that you see on the estimated cost side, that's the amount that is, you'll see on a later slide. We are over that amount, so we have to budget for that additional expense, but the majority can be funded through the savings that we found in the budget. And then we're also asking to increase the LPN hours at the intermediate school from 6.5 to 7, and that's approximately $1,822 additional to the budget. And then the SRO position, that has still yet to be determined. So for priority 1, which we are asking to be built into the 22-23 budget, that brings our personnel total to about $506,000.
Chrissy, can I? Thank you, Chrissy. Just a couple additional remarks related to staffing. We do feel it's important that the board understands that there are items requested in priority 2 and priority 3 that actually have a fair amount of merit to them, and we just feel it's important that you understand that. Just a couple of examples I'll take, since Deb is here from the high school. She would love to have another physical education teacher to ensure that we have a very manageable student-to-teacher ratio in our physical education classes. She would love to have another agriculture teacher. We have a very robust, strong ag program here at Shippensburg, and I think we all would like to support and reward them for their efforts and what they've done, and we'd like to be able to offer more electives in that area and not turn kids away who really would like to have that. But I think what you're going to see through what we've requested here, which we've, from the original priority 1 page, if you recall, we basically cut that expense in half because we really want to request things that we feel are sustainable over a longer period of time. And that's important to us, that we think about not just this year or the next year, but the following years and so on. You are also going to see that there's been a major focus on what we can do at the elementary level, those early stages of learning for our students here in Shippensburg, what we can do to bring kids up to as close to grade level as possible, and also with, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, our population has become needier. And I would like Sherry to share a little bit more about the top several there, the special education items, so that you understand the logic and the rationale behind that. The other thing I would just say, we originally were looking at the new time aids from 6. We went from 6 to 4. And in talking with the leaders of the administrative team, we think we can make that work. The other thing that you'll see on here that I would just like to make a remark on is the SRO. There's nothing more important than the safety of our kids and our staff. I think I speak for everybody when I say that. But I do know that we have a new chief of police for the Shippensburg Borough, and I do know that I have a wonderful resource right here on the board in Chief Scott, and Dave Lindemuth here at the high school, who has a lot of good relationships with first responders. We just had a terrific event over at the intermediate school the other day. And I'm learning more and more about that. I really would like to meet with these gentlemen and pick their brains and make sure that we are doing things that are substantial, that are going to improve the probability that we can keep our students and staff safe across all the buildings here across Shippensburg School District. So that one is still to be determined on the recommendation on that, but I do think that is something that where we don't want to make a quick decision, we want to make a really good decision on that. Whether it be an SRO, whether it be a small police force of ourselves, whether it just be working with the borough and their staff and what they can do in the way of visibility. I will say this, during the last week of school when I started here, May 23rd, after the horrible incident in Texas, we had a ton of visibility from our local police force, and it's greatly appreciated. With that, I would like to turn things over to Sherry just to share a little bit more about that focus with our elementary special education and what that can do for us.
So with our focus up here on elementary special education, Lauren could probably do a better job of explaining it than I can, but basically, as part of our kindergarten registration process and new students registering into the district, the special education department has identified new students that will be moving into the district that would put our current ABA classroom over legal limits. So as you have students with more needs in special education, the student-to-teacher ratio is lower legally. So either we're going to hire another ABA teacher to keep this program in-house and have 2 ABA classrooms, which we have the students that would support that, or we're going to have to pay for those students to be educated somewhere else, which will be more costly and not as effective, because if we can educate them here in our district, they are in their neighborhood schools, they are with their neighbors, they are with their friends. We can educate them here, and we have more control over the quality of education that they receive. So that's actually the top 3 positions are, we have students registering in here that require us to have those positions either internally, or we're going to have to send them out, which will cost us more money and be less effective. The registered behavior technician, elementary teachers are experiencing more behaviors as our population shifts. So the registered behavior technician should help the elementary teachers being able to control more of those behaviors in their classrooms. So they'll be able to see those behavior plans working out with fidelity. And if you do follow behavior plans with fidelity, they do work on students. So we'll be able to help mediate some of the behaviors that our elementary teachers are seeing. Our English as a second language teacher, our ESL numbers are increasing quite a bit. So I'm doing numbers for our comprehensive planning, and just since 2019, 2020, our overall population of ESL students has increased by 66%. And then when we start looking at the high need of ESL students, which are level 1s and 2s, those are newcomers, they have increased by 367% from 2019-20 to 2021-2022. So we're having a large increase in the need of our ESL teachers, which is why I want to start bringing them in-house as our need raises. Plus, as Christy said, it does actually save us a little bit of money to bring the one teacher in-house. Alternative education teacher. This is for alternative high school. These are our students that are not successful in the traditional high school setting here at Shippensburg Area Senior High School. So what we have been doing is we've been sending them outward to, I can't remember, it's called Alt-High, can you remember what Affinity, not Xfinity, that's a cable company. Affinity, where they've been educated 9 hours a week by a teacher there, and then they actually do our Kayola coursework. So I'm paying through our cyber charter, or not our cyber charter, but through our cyber budget for them to be educated. And then we're paying, I believe, $78,000 for 13 spots out there for 9 hours a week, plus transportation. Mrs. Zimma and I met with President Patterson a couple weeks ago and talked about renting a room from the university. We don't really have room here on campus for alternative high school, plus the students that are in alternative high school, if we were thinking about bringing them into they have bad feelings about being in this building, so we don't want to bring them back to this building. But we talked with President Patterson, and we are able to get a room on campus where we could bring our own teacher in internally to work with those students. And she would do so more than 9 hours a week because, well, he or she would do so more than 9 hours a week. They would be able to work with the students and getting co-op opportunities on campus, trying to get them to realize some of the or post-secondary education options that are available to them to help motivate them more to finishing their high school credits and graduating. It would be a better program if we're running it internally rather than shipping it outward. And we would be able to save about $9,000 doing that internally with renting a spot on campus for those students to go to.
And that's
do have a-
one teacher?
It would be one teacher, yes.
Is that Superman?
Could be.
I mean, the alternative high school, they had like probably 9 teachers.
I know the students that are currently going there, there's only one teacher at Affinity for that,
How many students, did you mention how many students?
13.
13.
Mrs. Woodall, would you explain how, because it came up at our AT meeting, about how through Keola, like they're the teacher of record, but this teacher's there to support?
Yeah, so the teacher that's there to support them is not the teacher of record. The teacher of record is through the Keola courses that we contract and pay for, because you have to be certified to teach certain subjects. So, like, I'm certified to teach math and science. I can't teach an English class, but I could oversee somebody who's being graded by somebody else in English. So I could help them with their English work, I just can't be their teacher of record in English.
So they're essentially doing online education through Keola, but they have a teacher, supervisor, helper person.
Yes, which is the same thing that's going on at Affinity right now.
And how many students could we serve? Like, if we're paying $78,000 plus the transportation for 13 students, like, what is the maximum amount that one teacher could have?
Well, this is not a special education, so there's not like a caseload maximum amount. It's just looking at the spacing. Currently, in that classroom that we looked at and toured at the university, there's spacing for probably about 20 comfortably. And we would want to start with our 13 first, just to see how it goes internally before we start adding more students to that caseload.
I'm going to add on to Mrs. Everly's comment. I think what she was looking for is what could be the maximum, what do you feel could be the maximum of one teacher? Do you have an estimate supporting however many students?
I'm going to say that these students probably have some more needs to push them and motivate them towards completing their work. I would feel comfortable saying at the most 20. I don't feel comfortable going up to that amount right now until we see how it plays out. But I know with the level of need that these kids are going to have to be motivated to complete their coursework, it is going to be a workload for them.
So because it's I have a lot of questions because I didn't get a lot of information on this prior. So when it comes, because it's alternative high school, they would not be required to be there like 7:30 to 2:30. Is it possible, would they be doing like a 7:30 to an 11:30 and like an 11:30 to a 2:30 so that?
So we would model it based off of what the current alt-high hours are, which I believe are 8 to 11. So those are the current hours of alt-high, and that's what we were looking at. And then we were looking at getting the students co-op opportunities on campus for the afternoon, where they could earn money and work in the afternoon.
Thank you, Sherry. In addition to what Sherry was saying regarding alternative ed, there was one other remark I wanted to make.
Alternative ed, alternative high school.
Alternative high school, I'm sorry. Something I forgot to say regarding the benefit of the noontime aides. Currently, we have, according to the elementary principals, we have some of our instructional specialists that are covering noontime supervision and so on, reading specialists, speech therapists, and so on. By having these noontime aides, that frees up these people to work with students that really need some interventions. And the impact that could have over the period of 180 days is pretty profound. So I wanted to make sure and share that.
So back to the alternative alternative education, is that a full-time position if it's 8 to 11?
That's when they're going to be physically in the classroom, but they're still going to be working with the students in their co-op, placing them, making connections with the university. Plus, we were also looking at possibly having the teacher teaching one block of courses here at the high school to help out with the electives. I will say, without the high school getting some of their requests, we are struggling to be able to get the kids the electives that they need to meet our graduation credit requirement. So Mrs. Luffy and I have had discussions about coming to you possibly with the request of seniors who've met their graduation requirements. Can we do early release with them so we don't have to have them here taking extraneous credits, and we can get those credits for the freshmen and sophomores that need them. As the bubbles from the middle school come up here to the high school, we're not having the staffing to be able to meet the graduation requirement needs and elective needs for them. So it was the hope to put this person in for one of the blocks here so they can pick up some of that course load. I don't know, Mrs. Lucky, if you want to speak a little bit about the future without electives.
I mean, just for example, like our ag program, half of the students that elected to have an agricultural course, we had to cut their class requests. So, I mean, you have more than enough to give another full ag teacher a full-time schedule. That means half the requests we have are not being met. So those kids are getting pushed into other classes that, there's space for them, they just don't necessarily have a desire for that.
Back to the alternative high school. Is it, you're saying it's modeled after the one we were using?
It's modeled after Affinity.
Did anybody go look there and see how many teachers they had per student?
Lauren has been really working with Alternative High School for the past year that she's been here. I just assigned them the Kayola courses, but Lauren is on top of what they're doing at Affinity compared to what we offer here.
It's been transitioning, and sorry to interrupt, it's been transitioning since the other districts in the county have pulled out of that program. And so with the retirement of Bob Goodwill, we're going to have to promote him that he was a long-standing teacher and mentor at the alternative high school program. And then once he retired, there have been additional adjustments made to the delivery system.
I currently believe Shippensburg is the only one still using Alternative High School. Hence why they're down to one teacher.
So, while we're making comments, I'm glad that you brought up these comments about the high school. Even before you were saying those things, I was sort of looking through this list and kind of creating rough categories in my head, and I mean, all due respect to our wonderful administrators, but, I sort of have an anti-administration bias in the sense that, like, I, don't want to see, like, administration sort of continually grow and grow and grow, because that's kind of the most visible thing, without seeing, growth in those positions where people are actually, interacting with students. And I appreciate this emphasis on elementary education and special education. I think that's vital, that we take care of that population, and as our student population is changing in general, we need to stay on top of that. But these concerns, or these comments about students not being able to take the electives that they want, whatever, I mean, some of that sort of, that same conversation, that same argument kind of seeps into the high school. I mean, if you talk to kids about, sort of the kids that are enjoying high school or not enjoying high school, and you kind of talk to them about, like, what it is that they get out of it or what it is that they don't get out of it, I want to make sure that there's something here for everyone. I mean, the kids that are taking chemistry and physics and whatever, I assume they're going to get those classes and they're going to, whatever. But, the kids that are taking ag, I'm not sure where else they're going to get that if they don't get it from our high school. And clearly, you know, I think that our community, given where we live, like those are important opportunities, you know, to offer to our students. And if I'm hearing that only half of the students who wanted to take ag classes are able to take them, that suggests that there might be a lot of other students who should be, you know, sort of gently pushed into ag classes if they were available, but you can't even do that, right? I mean, a counselor can't come to a student and say, hey, perhaps you would enjoy this ag class, if we can't even give the ag classes to the students who want to take them. So, I don't know, that just seems like a pretty high priority to me, and I guess I'm just gonna say that I would support if we can, you know, find a way to sort of make it work to bolster that. I mean, you know, because I'm imagining, and I hesitate, I don't know if I'm stereotyping, maybe I'm saying the wrong things, but I'm just imagining a student who is really interested in ag classes, and if they're not able to take those, I'm not sure where else they're gonna find the classes that they want to take and the classes that are gonna give them a satisfying high school experience. I think it's pretty critical that we offer classes that are gonna give kids a satisfying high school experience, maybe especially if this is the last bit of formal education that, you know, we expect that they're gonna have. So, I don't know, I would definitely support that as a priority one position. I mean, I don't know if just that one position solves the issues that I'm talking about, but at least, you know, I'm supportive of investing more money in that direction to make sure that those needs are satisfied.
I definitely agree with what Dr. Goetz is saying. I mean, it's Shippensburg to realize the community. I was able to go and I bought plants for my garden from them. So, I mean, they're doing great things. I spoke with Mrs. Beer, like she has great ideas. I mean, we also have an empty greenhouse at James Bird that if another full-time teacher, they could even expand that to the elementary level and do some fun things with them as well and get into hydroponics. I think it's just teaches great life skills and common sense. You know, I fully support making the full-time ag position a priority one.
I would just add, when I was here 12 years ago, I regularly attended their banquets, and what those kids produce and demonstrate at the end of your banquet and their awards ceremony and their parliamentary procedure, and I could go on and on. It's impressive, so I certainly agree. Unfortunately, we're dealing with limited resources, and it's a constant struggle to balance those resources with the needs of the community and so on, and the needs of the school. But as I said previously, there are things that didn't make that list that have a lot of merit to it, and I'm hopeful, if not next year, that there will be strong consideration in the near future to try to make some moves in that area should resources become available. If it's possible to pull that off this year and it's the will of the board, we certainly will go back and take another look at that and consider anything that you would direct us to do.
I guess one comment I'll make, and I guess the question comes down to, where do you start drawing the line? I see on here also family consumer science teacher and technology education teacher in priority 3. I'll bet we could get some people who make just as impassioned a plea for one of those teachers as we are hearing for the ag teacher. All 3 probably very valid in their own realm. Again, it comes down to, okay, where, we could keep adding to that list. And I'm not sure I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's something we need to consider. I think somebody could make just as impassioned a plea to add family consumer science or a technology education teacher. Got a lot of kids who don't go to the Career Center. Got a lot of kids who aren't going to go on to college. They could certainly benefit from a technology education teacher. It comes down to where do we draw the line for this year?
I will say a little bit about the FCS and tech ed teachers. Currently, the high school does at least have 2 FCS and 2 tech ed teachers. Not that we wouldn't love to have more, but we only have 1 agricultural science teacher. And 3 years ago, for the comprehensive plan that I set up that expires in 2022 and the new one coming forth, we had discussed turning our Ag Sci program into a career technical education program where students could get into our Ag Sci program and graduate with credentials in agricultural science. When Kelly and I sat down to do the curriculum for that, it's impossible to do with 1 agricultural science teacher. We need at least 2 to be able to pull off making it a CTE program.
So there's presently 1 ag teacher, there's 2 technology instructor teachers presently. I mean, we also have on here a math teacher, but I assume that there's several math teachers. It's hard to be the only one of anything. I think it's hard to run an effective program with just 1 person of anything. I don't know.
Well, thank you for your remarks, and certainly we understand where you're coming from. I think what we'll do is let Christy go ahead and finish the presentation, and if there's any other further discussion, or as you take some time to digest this over the next few days and until Monday night, if there's any other thoughts or suggestions for us, we certainly would be open to making some adjustments. Thanks, Christy.
Sure. So then what we did is we took that list, like when you originally saw the list, you saw like the recommended list and then you saw the list of everything else. So then what we did is we actually then categorized it into like 3 tiers. So priority 1, priority 2, and then priority 3. And in the priority 2 and priority 3 categories, they're in no priority order, but we're just saying, you know, priority 2 is more of a need, we feel, than priority 3. But like Dr. Moyer has said, these are all a need for the district. I won't read each of them. I will just open up and ask if there's any questions regarding priority 2 or the priority 3 list.
Dwayne Burt, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, on priority 2, I would really just direct this question to Dr. Moyer. And the special education compliance monitor contracted is a relatively small amount of money. And I'm just curious what your recommendation would be as it relates to that. In other words, how important would this relatively small amount of money in a contract be to ensuring compliance? What is the likelihood that otherwise, given in light of the fact that our special education department has grown quite a bit, we're bringing quite a number of students back and programs back and different things from the outside, and then what the potential risk would be if we don't put this compliance monitoring system in place. Could one non-compliant issue or situation have covered the entire cost and then some? Could you comment on that, please?
I certainly can. And Mr. Burt, I appreciate your remarks regarding the importance of that. And again, it's not relatively a real high number. The thing, when we were struggling with this and talking about it behind closed doors in our offices and so on, the thing that moved it to priority 2, at least for me, was the fact that we have 2 full-time special education supervisors, a lead person and an assistant person. who are very capable. And even though our special education numbers, I believe we're around 18 or 19% of our population, which is a little higher than state average. So I do think there is merit behind this, but I would also say, knowing the personnel that we have in those positions, I do believe that we can monitor and do a pretty good job of being in compliance, given the personnel that we have in the special ed department. But I think you make a very good point, and tomorrow, we could have a student register here that would be very high needs, that would take a lot of resources, and I think you make a very good point, and this is one we struggled with kind of going back and forth.
Right, so just to follow up, I think what I heard you say is that given the staff we have on board and so forth, that we would handle and manage and take responsibility for all the compliance issues from within.
That is correct. And believe me, I know if Lauren were here tonight, she's on vacation this week, but if she were here tonight, she would really appreciate your remarks. And again, we did give it careful consideration. We were just trying to do everything that we could to bring that number down to a reasonable number that we felt we could sustain long term.
Thank you for that. And just one other follow-up. I know some years ago we heard regular discussion about the unique nature of the school situation as it related to adding personnel. In other words, from years back, which we haven't talked about in really quite a long time. But for example, if we added, let's say if we added English teachers or whatever, and then we found ourselves in an economic downturn or in a group of students, grouping of students where there was less need for that grouping of professional staff, that we couldn't, for example, make a reduction in force of an English teacher. We would instead rather have to eliminate a program, for example, eliminate English. And those are some of the discussions that we'd had before in careful consideration for adding any sort of position. And I would just ask that Dr. Moyer sort of give us at some appropriate point tonight or in the near future some reminder and primer of how that works in our modern day time. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I'll digest that question and give it some thought. And in the near future, I'll provide some information and some thoughts regarding that based upon my 4 decades in the field. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was just going to add, I am no expert in the furlough laws, and I don't know if they've changed, but since what I've known last, but what you were saying, Mr. Burt, yes, one of the furlough laws were what you were talking about, through programmatic furloughs. You couldn't just do one. And then, I don't know, it's fairly new since I've come in to the school business realm. They actually added another way to furlough. They call them economic furloughs, so you just don't have to do it by programmatic. But here's where I'm not the expert on all the ins and outs behind the economic furloughs. If you do the economic furlough route, you can't just pick a teacher or two. It has to be a percentage across the board of, I believe, like administration and all that. But again, I don't have the details behind that, and that's something Dr. Moyer, and if he needs assistance in HR, we can certainly bring more information of the procedures of furlough. But I do know that economic furlough was added. I don't believe that was ever removed yet.
Good. Well, and again, I'm not trying to bring up a difficult or negative connotation in discussion or whatever, but we certainly, if we're looking at adding positions, we need to understand, that we want to add positions, and I support what's on the list, but we want to understand all the ins and outs, ramifications of what we're doing for the long haul.
Thank you. Sure. Or, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So moving on, if you remember on the personnel list that we're recommending, there were a few areas where we did not include the cost. And the reason why is we are actually able to reduce some costs within the budget. And so Mrs. Zima has provided us this information. So in the special education department, in the original proposed final budget, there were a number of costs that were included in that budget that we are now able to remove from the budget. So you can see the list there, starting with we are able to return emotional support student back to the district. So you can see the savings of about $50,000. We were able to return a student from River Rock back into the district, so about approximately $25,000 cost savings. We have a student transferring from River Rock to Yellow Breeches, another about $25,000 savings. We have a student returning from our news story placement, so about a $70,000 savings. A student transferring from FLC, so about a $53,000 savings. We have another student transitioning from the Franklin Learning Center back to the middle school, about a $52,000 savings. We have a student transferring from the Franklin Learning Center to the high school or maybe graduating, so that would be another $52,000 savings. And we had an unplanned student graduating from New Story, about a $70,000 savings. So that brings a reduction in the original special education budget presented to you of approximately $396,000. So what would we like to do with that $396,000 savings? You can see the proposed reallocations below. We have a student that we're going to have to place at New Story for the 22-23 school year. So that's $70,000. So during the 21-22 school year, current school year, we had to place somebody at the Franklin Learning Center, so we need to put that in the budget, about $53,000. We have a student that's going to be coming into the 22-23 school year that we're going to have to place at the Franklin Learning Center, about $37,000. Another student we had to place at the Franklin Learning Center during the 21-22 school year, so we had to add that back in at $52,000. From the personnel staffing list is the autism teacher, so we'd like to pay for the autism teacher out of these savings. We'd like to do a speech and language contract to help out with some of our students at $20,000. The executive session item from the personnel list at about $25,000. Funding the majority of our noontime aides from the reduction, $26,000. To hire an LPN, a new part-time LPN at 5.75 hours at about $20,000, and then to increase our LPN hours from 6.5 to 7 at about $1,800. So that brings that cost to about shy of $400,000, or a deficit which we added back into the personnel listing of about $3,500.
Question. I'm not quite sure how to ask this, but, and I'm not questioning the positions themselves. The autistic teacher, it looks like it's part of this, and the executive session item. I'm not questioning the positions themselves. I'm questioning not showing a cost for them. When the savings looks to me as if it's transitory, I'm not sure if that's the right phrase or not, but it's based on the reductions are all students transferring. And is that going to be the case in future years when we still have that position here? Do you understand where I'm going with this?
So obviously, let's just take one from the list and I'll try to explain it. Say we have the student, like fourth one down, transferring back in from News Story. Obviously, if that student, I don't know what grade it is, but let's just say fifth grade, I don't know. So if we're able to serve that student and we never have to place them again, that's like a reoccurring savings. Right. What you're asking is what we don't know. You know, will we have any new students come in? Because we don't have a lot of contingencies budget in the special ed budget. Or if any of these students come here and I don't know how often they get placed back out again, yes, there could be these expenses that really will need to be added back in future years.
That's my question. I mean, was each one of the students coming back, do we have a place for them right now?
Look at Mrs. Whittle.
This is actually more of a question
mean, we don't have the personnel now, and now I'm just wondering.
I know that if the request was for an autism teacher at the elementary level, so if we're looking for, the student returning from Franklin Learning Center to Sam's, well, that's not going to be the autistic support teacher. The student returning from New Story, I know New Story is where we place most of our autism students. That may be a student that could have been supported by the autism support teacher at the elementary level. With that being said, I do know that we already have an autism support classroom at Nancy Grayson and one at the intermediate school for the elementary level. But I do know that we have more students enrolling in kindergarten that need that autistic support. So if we don't have that autistic support teacher, we will have to place them somewhere else because we won't be able to enroll them. I mean, they've already enrolled in our district. There are students, but we won't be able to place them in the autistic support room at Nancy Grayson because then those numbers would be too high for the student-teacher ratio.
I have other questions, but I think it would be, it has to be an executive session on this.
There's no set number, for instance, of these people come and go, correct?
That's correct.
So is there no, you can't set a line here, it's once a year, so it's constantly up and down.
Correct. We don't know who's going to move into our district. We're not going to know their needs. Yeah. Special ed's a hard area that you're not going to be able to project from year to year. That is truly a.
But
more
the
of a-
students we're bringing back, we do now.
Yes, but the students that we're bringing back would be students that have, if we're looking at a continuum of needs, the student returning from New Story has learned what they can, like, we've got to look at least restrictive environment. So at New Story, they've gotten to that point where that's no longer their least restrictive environment. So by keeping them in that more restrictive environment, we're actually violating a law because we're not putting them in their least restrictive environment, which is what we're supposed to be doing. And again, this is not, I'm not Lauren, I don't know these specific students, I'm just saying what I know from basic special education law.
Okay, so moving on to the alternative education high school, Sherry has spoken pretty much to all this, so we'll just reiterate the slide real quickly. So currently, our cost, we have a contract with Affinity for approximately $67,000. The transportation to Affinity is about $31,000, so it's currently costing us just a little over $98,000. Like Mrs. Woodall has said, we'd like to bring this program in-house. So if we would hire an alternative education teacher, that cost would be just shy of $75,000. The transportation would be less to get the students to the SU campus at about $10,860. And then the facility contract with SU of just shy of $4,000 brings the total cost to $89,666. So that's a savings of about $8,600 if we bring the program back in-house. And I don't know if you had said, Mrs. Woodall, I know at like our 18 meeting and stuff, you were sharing some of the benefits of having this on the SU campus, if you want to speak to some of those benefits for our students.
Yes, so I talked about it a little bit, but a lot of these students are ones that are struggling with completing high school. So they've never stepped foot on the university campus, even though it's in their backyard. So being on that university campus gives you a different feeling about what your abilities are. It makes it seem more attainable for you to go into post-secondary education. That doesn't mean that they have to go into the university, but it just makes it that they can see themselves going and attaining more post-secondary. So maybe it might not be SU that they go to, but maybe they enroll in Central Penn, or maybe they go to YTI to pursue post-secondary education so they can, earn more money than just a high school diploma. Also, with being on the SU campus, we already have co-op opportunities on the SU campus with some of our special education population. Mrs. Zima has talked with their director, and they are more than happy to take in our alt-high students for doing some of that co-op, where they would get paid. So they would be able to come to classes from 8 to 11, and then spend their afternoon working at the bookstore or at some of the luncheon places there, and earning extra income for their family. So some of our alt-high students are single mothers that need an alternative way to get education and funding and money. Or again, students that just never really saw themselves fitting into the high school area, but this would allow them to see other opportunities available for them. Also, SU has told us that they're receiving some grant funding where students that meet a certain income level may be able to do Ship Start classes for free or greatly reduced, which they're already pretty reduced, but even more so reduced. Our students that are there for alt-high, when they're completing their high school credits, could also enroll in Ship Start classes to start earning some of those post-secondary credits as well. So it's something that will benefit our alt-high students more than going off to just affinity and sitting in their classroom for 3 hours and then going home.
So that brings us to our updated final budget summary. So revenues through May 16th, we had presented at about 58.8 million. Keep in mind that it did include 1 million of additional new state revenues. When looking at our earned income tax, it looks like it's coming in very strong, so we felt confident being able to add an additional 100,000 to our earned income tax revenue line item. As I had shared with you earlier, with the increase in our assessed value, we were able to add a small amount to our current real estate tax revenue of about 9,100, and adding in the additional property tax reduction homestead allocation of about 239,000. And then Mrs. Woodall had shared with us the preliminary federal program allocations. Previously, she had shared a percentage, but when I looked, so I used that percentage to project our preliminary federal program allocations, and so that was actually more aggressive than the preliminary numbers that we actually got, the physical numbers. So I was able to build in an additional, back into the budget, an additional about 45,000 in federal program revenue. So that brings our total revenues to just over 59.2 million. And then for our expenditures, through May 16th, expenditures were just over 60.1 million. And so we're talking with Dr. Moyer, just a little uncomfortable pulling out 1.2 million of cyber charter school expenditures. We are going to work hard over the summer to attract those students back, but we wanted to put in level funding where we are currently at 1.2 million. And then our updated personnel list, as we showed you this evening, we cut from a little over 1 million down to $500,000. So we were able to pull out 547,000 out of the new personnel request line item. That brings our total expenditures to 60.8 million. So when you look at our revenues compared to expenditures, that puts us at a deficit of just over 1.6 million, using about 78,000 from our fund balance for the PSERS retirement contribution increases. We would need to use just over 1.5 million to balance our budget. Is there any questions?
I just want to clarify the cyber charters. In other words, the reduction in expenditure that we had looked at two meetings ago, that's been removed. It's now back into the budget, the total budgeted amount. We're no longer looking at budgeting for a reduction in cost.
That is correct. So just to reiterate, our current cyber charter school expenditures are trending right around 2.7 million. So that full 2.7 million is back into the budget instead of like 1.5.
Mr. Hilbringer, I am cautiously optimistic we're going to be able to bring some of those students back. I'm with Christy and Joanne. I like to budget conservatively. I'm not a gambler, and I just think that's the more prudent move to make.
agree.
So, help me out if I'm framing this correctly, but I mean, one way to sort of think about this is, this was approximately what our budgeted deficit was for this past year, and that deficit is actually not going to happen. And, so it's almost as if we pushed, we had to push the deficit away a year. Is that appropriate framing?
I would say, yes, that's correct, because we received in those unexpected revenues that we've been sharing with you. Some of them are reoccurring, like EIT and current real estate tax revenue, which as we see those are increasing and we feel comfortable increasing, we are increasing the reoccurring revenue. But the realty transfer tax, that's truly one-time revenue. That's a windfall that we received this year. That won't continue. I don't know if I have it with me, but when I presented the revenues, I believe our realty transfer tax is more like around 100,000 per year. It's just been the last couple years, it's been an anomaly.
Dwayne Burt, maybe a question or statement. As we're looking at this $1.5 million planned use of fund balance or budget deficit, if I understand the numbers correctly, it really won't materialize either, in that we currently are budgeting, what is it, $3.5 million of debt service, and yet the requirement in debt service is what, $1.2 million? So until we borrow that money and begin making the payments on that money, this $1.5 million isn't, it gets washed away by the credit from that account. But once that becomes real, you take this, we don't have these windfalls from real estate transfer tax or whatever that Christy mentioned. This $1.5 million of deficit, if we borrowed all the money and we're required to be paying it back, that number would be closer to $4 million deficit. It's pretty sobering, really. Is that kind of close?
Mr. Burt, help me. Where are you getting the 4 million?
Well, what's the budget for debt service? 3.5 million?
Just a little over 3.6.
Okay, and what's the current requirement for paying debt service? 1.2?
I think it's going to be a little bit more than that, because we do start paying on the 10 million. I think that 1.2 was before we borrowed any money, and since we borrowed the 10 million, I will have to revise that number. But let's just say on average about 2 million maybe. So we're going to have about 1.6 million in debt service that we're not expending next year.
Okay, which wipes away the deficit this year. But when we start paying that out, then the deficit would actually become real.
Correct, but I believe, unless I'm not thinking this through correctly, the real deficit would be about the 1.6 million. Because that's kind of like what's sitting in debt service, so that's kind of washing each other.
Well, it'll wash this year, but in a future year, if this were in a future year and you were looking at $1.5 million in deficit, and you were required to pay all the debt service, that number might be, north of 3, headed toward 4.
I'm following that, I think. Yeah.
Because the 3.6 million in debt service is already budgeted. That's in there. So if we would spend all that, that's already in the budget. Our deficit would be 1.5. But the 1.5 is getting wiped away because we currently will not have 3.6 million worth of debt service next year.
I think that was the point.
Right, there, in the future years, there will be a real deficit if we don't, get additional revenue in. Because, I mean, it's covering what I would say reoccurring expenditures, unless, putting the big unless out there, we could get our cyber charter schools back down to closer where we were pre-pandemic, and then that wipes away the deficit, but I don't know if we'll be able to get back to those levels or not.
We'll try.
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make is that really in the last few years, we've been budgeting this level debt service and so forth. And I think I've actually kind of felt like that it has caused some feelings that, well, hey, we don't even need to pay much attention to a deficit budget because it doesn't ever turn out to be real, or at least it hasn't in the last couple of years. And I think the point that I'm trying to illustrate is that there are valid reasons why that's the case, but that we shouldn't assume that's the way it is.
Correct.
I mean, the $1.5 million windfall, which you said is more like $100,000 in a normal year, for a couple of successive years, we've been budgeting debt service at a level of, what, 2 or 2.5 million more than we're incurring. That's the reason that the fund balance, is growing, and or the deficit doesn't seem to be much to pay attention to anymore. But when we borrow that money, things will change.
That is correct.
Thank you.
That's a nice lead into our next slide.
So that brings us to an updated look at fund balance. So the first column is our actual fund balance, where we ended last year. So I won't read down through every category, but you can see last year, everything in green is our general fund balance. So we ended with about 11.9 million in general fund balance, and you can see how that's divvied up among categories. And then we have a small amount sitting in capital reserve fund, about 245,000. So in the second column, I left in there just for reference, the projected use column. This is what we projected to use during the 21-22 budget process. And then the third column is what we've actually used in 21-22, because we've actually used more than what we had projected to use. So you can see then in the third column, that's what we have used so far. So then you move over to the fourth column, and that's our estimated fund balance for year ending 6/30. So how you get that number is you take the actual fund balance, column 1, less column 3, our actual use, to come up with the estimated fund balance as of the 6/30/22 school year. And then I put a column in there of what we're projecting to use in 22-23. So you can see the PSERS. And then if you scroll down to the unassigned, you can see that's where we're balancing the budget. And then those other numbers in between are the capital maintenance items that we brought before the board to ask to be funded as well.
Can I ask you a question? What is flagship Proud Projects?
So way back when Dr. Wilson was here, we started an initiative to do 3 big projects within the district. And those 3 big projects were, one, to upgrade, I'm going to say, the front of the high school. I think it was $60,000 set aside for that. And then there was also about $500,000 set aside to upgrade the high school auditorium. And then the rest of that was towards a stadium. So the remaining amount that you see in there, the majority of it, I think Mrs. Luffy has a little bit yet to spend for her front entrance project. Not much. I can't remember if it's 10,000 or where we're at that, but it's very small. So the majority that you see sitting in that line item was set aside for a stadium.
So stadium was included with the projects in front of the building.
Correct. So there are 3 initiatives in the flagship Proud project. That was high school front entrance upgrades to the high school auditorium, and then a stadium. You're welcome. So if there's no any other questions on fund balance, I know that we have been talking about this, and what does future budgeting look like? Sure. Yes, so that's on, if you look at the line item, district safety, 250,000 was coming out of district safety, and 70,000 was coming out of capital maintenance fund balance. Mr. Kreis is also asking to do other upgrades, the domestic water piping at the intermediate school. And then you, at the last meeting, approved some additional projects that he could get started on, like the gym floors. Oh my goodness, can't remember what all those were.
Dr. Moore, if we pass this budget, are we gonna start those safety items immediately? The reason why I'm asking, because after the Texas shooting, the federal government's gonna be throwing money out left and right for safety of schools, a lot more things we can get within the school district. And lots of times we have to match it. But if we spend it up front, they won't give you to replace it, so that's what I'm wondering.
I think it would be prudent on our part to, see where that goes and be a little bit patient. And since this is still fairly early in June, I think we have a little bit of time.
And just to
That's a good idea, though.
Just to clarify, we used to build in these projects into the actual budget, and then we actually remove them, and we bring them as a separate list. Usually, we bring them at the same time as budget approval, but with board direction, we can certainly wait and hold off on some of those projects.
I'd like to get them done, but I also like to get the federal money coming our direction. I just learned through the years that if you spend it, they're not gonna replace it. So if you have it stand available, then you can match it, then maybe it will match it.
So we all know that we have some future budget concerns that we are going to have to be facing with the federal stimulus money that we receive from the federal government. So, just trying to look ahead and be like, what are those costs and how can we maybe fund these positions in the future? So we definitely know that we're going to have a new warehouse come on our books in 23-24. It's currently being constructed. And you can see there, it's about a 1 million square foot warehouse. So looking at what a 1 million square foot warehouse brings in currently in our district, that's just shy of about $490,000. We would get an additional current real estate tax revenue in 23-24. So, if we want to say, okay, let's set that aside to fund these ESSER positions when they run all, what kind of money are we looking at? So in the current ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 budgets, we're funding 6.5 teaching positions and 1 admin position out of that. So that brings the estimated cost for those positions to about $825,000. We also budgeted in the ESSER budget these temporary professional positions like interventionists, like coaches. We would love to keep those positions. We all know that we did bring them in as temporary, knowing we may not be able to keep them, but would love to have them if we can. So if we would be able to keep those positions, that would be an additional about $409,000 that we'd have to absorb back into the budget. And also the 4 new 7th grade teaching positions we are going to need once that classroom wing is built at the middle school at $400,000. And so that brings the total personnel cost to about $1.6 million. Again, we could reduce that by the temporary positions, and it could be 1.2, but again, I know that there's a need for them as well. So anywhere from 1.2 to 1.6 million. Additional expenditures we're going to need to fund in the future, and we know that we can say that safely we have a new warehouse that's coming in, and we could set that money aside towards some of these new personnel expenditures. And then the other thing Dr. Moyer and I talked about is if we get additional state revenue above the 1 million that we put in the budget, we might want to look at setting some of that aside for these positions as well, so it's not as hard to absorb them back into the budget.
And just to reiterate what Chrissy just said, because we have used ESSER funds, temporary money for potential recurring expenses, I agree with Sherry 100%. Adding those positions, even if we have them short-term, we were able to help a lot of kids and intervene and really help them in the way of their performance and so on, especially at the elementary level. And the thing that I do feel really good about with what Shippensburg has done, with those positions and so on, they have full disclosure to the professional staff that are in those positions that they may be temporary. So as time goes on and so on, I just think we want to be as proactive as possible and lay the groundwork for, for that 23, 24 year when those ESSER funds go away.
So moving on to the next slide brings us to our other remarks. I do want to apologize. At the May 16th board meeting, there was this discussion among the board about putting a motion on the agenda to reclass some PSERS, $1 million of PSERS fund balance to help pay for these 7th grade teaching positions, to reclassify that and set it aside solely for that purpose. That, unless there has been a change on the board, you will see that on the upcoming board agenda under discussion items to reclass that money to be able to gradually afford paying for those new 7th grade positions. The motion or the recommendation that was made at the May Budget and Finance meeting was the first year we used $400,000 of that repurposed fund balance. The following year, $300,000, then $200,000, then $100,000, and hopefully by then we were able to build all those 4 positions slowly into our budget. So again, you will see that on the next agenda unless I hear otherwise. But I thought there was consensus to get that on the agenda, and I apologize for not making the last board meeting. And then there was discussions about what the cost would be for a repeater. Obviously, the repeater works for the district's walkie-talkies, but we understand that it doesn't necessarily work for the emergency personnel people that come into our building. So we're still looking into that. I just wanted to let the board, we have not forgot about that. We are looking into the cost, and we will be back in touch with additional information on that. And then there was also a question about the camera projects, and if we were to delay like the elementary, like what would be the cost of the elementary? So the cost of, well, let me back up. In the original presentation of maintenance request, I believe the camera project was presented at about $320,000. When I checked with Mr. Kreitz, he provided me the documentation over a year ago that we received from the contractor, and they had the camera project priced at about $250,000. That number was bumped up because obviously costs have gone up. We don't have a new proposal from them, but it was bumped up to $320,000 in hopes that would cover the increase that we're seeing in supplies altogether. But based on the, I'm going to say, outdated proposal at about $250,000 to complete the camera project across the district, the portion of that can be attributed to the elementary cost is right around $175,299. So I know that there was maybe questions of, do we move forward with everything but the elementary? So I wanted to present that number. When Mr. Kreitz recently talked to the company, they said add an additional 10% probably to that number since costs have went up. So that would bring the elementary portion to $192,828.
Well, this, we're going to be doing a middle school, correct? We're going to be doing something in the middle school. Well,
Yes.
I was just wondering, I know I talked about delay until we get the federal and state money, but when if we have the walls open at the middle school, is this going to be wired cameras, does he know, or is this going to be wireless? The reason why I'm saying, because we got the walls open, then we have to close them again.
Troy, did you hear that question?
It's about the cameras we're talking about putting in the schools. Do you know if they're going to be wireless or they're going to be wired?
The other ones we have, the cameras are wired into a control unit. We can access them wirelessly, like to view them on a phone, on a tablet. If we need to see the viewing. But the actual, as a safety precaution, they preferred wiring them back, hardwiring back to their unit. That way, if something was going on, it was going to be a little more reliable.
Yeah.
That was their recommendation a few years back.
Okay, because the middle school's included in this for the cameras, correct?
That is correct. correct. There's a portion in there.
Since we got the, if we're doing remodeling, got the walls open,
So Dr. Stevens, do you know, is it advantageous to do it while we're doing the middle school construction? Or is there really no additional cost if we would do this after the middle school construction is complete?
There would be, I guess it depends how the contractors would allow these contractors doing the building, allow these contractors to come in. You know, it'd be easier to do the wiring before the ceiling tiles were up and stuff like that. Run some of the wiring. I don't know how the contractors work together on something like that, or if that, putting that in part of the remodeling is easier, cheaper. You'd have to talk to Mr. Price on that.
can someone find out? Because I hate to have the walls open and closed, and we have to go back and open them up again.
Sure, we'll look into that and we'll get you answers. And then just the other item here is, there has been a request at the high school, middle school for facility dogs, and we will be bringing additional information to you as the board regarding those requests.
Chrissy, I might just add, on Monday night's agenda, Mrs. Mowry will be here with Harry, her facility dog. I personally, this is a fairly new concept for me, but I was impressed with what she told me, even though she only had Harry for the last couple of weeks of school, and especially the impact on some of our special needs classrooms and the students that were there and so on. So Deb has expressed interest at the high school. Mr. Miller at the middle school, he might be a little bit lukewarm on that issue. I think he would like to learn a little bit more about it. I would just say it is a pretty big commitment. And there are some expenses involved there with staff training, with veterinarian fees, with the food for the dog, and then also the 24/7 care with any like any other pet, or even though this is a lot more than a pet, and so on. So we look forward to Monday night having Terry come in person with Harry so that you get a chance to meet him. And also, I've asked her to share a little bit about the process and also about what she perceives to be, even though she's only had him for a short time, the positive impact that he's had on the kids and so on. And so I would just encourage you, any and all questions that you can think of while we have Terry here Monday night, feel free to ask her about that. But I'm still in a learning process for that as well.
And that brings us to our next slide. I think you're well aware, we would like the board to take official final action on a final budget at our meeting coming up here on Monday, June 13th. And then that takes us just to our closing remarks slide, where if you have any other questions or further discussion, guidance that you can provide us on how we should bring forth a final budget to you all for approval.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things. Dr. Moyer, I know you mentioned it twice, I think, tonight. I'm really looking forward to your plan on trying to get kids back to face-to-face learning, because I agree with you. I think it's so valuable, and I hope that we get those numbers back. Of course, we're not going to get everybody back, but I really hope that we get, whether that's half or 2/3 or whatever it may be, but because I really think that we have a great district, and our staff and the experience that is, comes with being here, I think is second to none. The other thing is, do you have a timeline? I know, maybe you said it, I missed, about the potential meeting with the new chief of police, just because I know that is such a hot topic with school safety and everything. So I just was wondering if we had a timeline that we could possibly expect for that.
I'm having trouble hearing that side of the, but my hope is to meet with our chief, this chief, as well as Dave Lindemuth, and in a relatively short period of time, come to you with a recommendation. The thing that I just feel is so important, that we do something more than symbolic. And I have seen districts that have done symbolic things but have not done substantial things to improve safety and security. And safety and security is more than just a horrific event or an intruder with a weapon. It also has to do with, medical emergencies. It has to do with, the utilization of our AED, our fire extinguishers. And it's a very comprehensive type thing. The thing I will tell you is that I've been very impressed with Dave Lindemuth, not only recently, but when I was here previously. And with his relationship with our first responders and his tenure here at the high school and knowing this community, I feel I've got the right people with him, Chief Scott, our new chief, and I believe he brings like 25 years of policing experience or something like that. So I'm planning on learning from these professionals and from my own past experiences and bringing a recommendation in the near future.
Good, sounds good. Thank you.
Dwayne Burke, just to dovetail on those comments, Dr. Moyer, on this topic of repeater for emergency personnel walkie-talkies, it's my belief that this well, whatever the word is, that this information came as a result of a drill that was done some years ago. That's where this information, that this deficiency, if you will, came from. But as you're talking with the new chief of police and Mr. Scott and Mr. Lindenmuth, is certainly Mr. Lindenmuth is certainly an expert in terms of the school district and these facts. That's a perfect place to talk about this subject as well. In addition to putting the cost number on it, but to help us make sense out of what the real needs are, what the real vulnerabilities, if any, are, and so forth. So I hope that you would consider, Dr. Moyer, adding that to that group, because that's the perfect group in which to discuss this.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Great suggestion.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback off that, the Texas thing with radios, we would have the same problem they did here. Because state police has one radio frequency, Shippensburg Borough has another radio frequency, and Franklin County has another radio frequency. So nobody can talk to each other. It's going on for years in that thing. So he's right. What about Chief Carter at that meeting? Out of Chambersburg, out of Chambers, I think he'd be a valuable asset.
Good suggestions. As we wrap things up from the presentation, I know we need to have a brief executive session. I would just encourage board members, if, as you digest this information, and I know you've had it for a little bit of time now, but now with the explanations behind that and so on, if you have any further suggestions for us along the way or questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact us. We have a little time before Monday night, and I also realize that there are moves that we can make after Monday night as well. We have that authority as well. So I don't want to put too much pressure on you that way. Christy, Sherry, Deb?
Motion to adjourn.
Into executive session for negotiation matters.
Yes.
Two.